and we're going to be digging into how to help you get out of the day-to-day operations and build a more passively owned business so you can sell it for high value when ready. And our special guest today, Dion, just did that last year, wasn't it? Was it early this year that you finalised the sale, or
late last year?
Late last year. What was that like, out of interest? Just, I don't know, actually, just give the viewers a sense of what it's like to work as hard as you've worked, as smart as you've worked, and to get that. Well, you don't. The listeners will soon find out you're a very humble man. I'm actually really looking forward to interviewing you. You are a humble man, smart man. You're certainly a client that I love to work with.
Thank you.
Because of your personality and your humbleness. You're the opposite of what do you call it, big swinging dicks. Sorry for the language, ladies and gentlemen, but anyway.
We're off to a flying start there.
Yeah, off to a flying start. What is it? What was it like? Like, actually, out of interest. I mean, I've sort of got a bit of a glimmer of it as you went through it, but yeah, what was that like?
Yeah, look, it was quite a process, and but I guess for someone that deals in the day-to-day of a very people-focused technical business, it was nice to have a very different angle on things, and to get to the end and put a full stop and an underline under it, an exclamation mark behind it, and go, right, that's what we've achieved. Now you got to a certain point and you do the day-to-day, but to actually make a milestone of and someone else sees the value in this that we've built up over time and wants to buy it, and now we've sold it and we're on to the next thing. It's like, wow, that's actually done, and it felt really, really good. It was one of those achievements where we talk around, celebrate the mini wins because the big ones are too long in between the gaps, but this was a proper big win where you get to the end and go, that's a significant achievement, and it felt really rewarding. Yeah.
And in a way, Dion, it must have been like a lifetime, like a sense of a lifetime reward too. And for those that don't know, Dion's in an engineering business that he's built and sold to a UK-based company. So when I say that was a lifetime, do you feel like you've been working towards that for, 15 years, 10 years? When was that your goal?
Yeah, 15, 20 years. It was one of those things that I didn't see it on the radar for many years. It was something that evolved over time. I was quite happy being an employee for a very long period of time. I quite liked the technical. I got into engineering because I was good at maths and science and liked doing those sorts of things. And then eventually you work out, engineering is actually a bit about people. That's this wasn't what I signed up for. I didn't sign up for a people business. I signed up for a technical business. What's all this about? And then realizing that if you actually lean into the people stuff as well, then that's really when the goals started getting kicked. And it wasn't just about the technical.
Wow. So that's super interesting for me. I actually want to dig into that because you just introduced something to me. The first thing we don't chat about what you were doing and how you got into it when we're working together. But, there's a couple of things that have just shown up for me. And the first one is, here you are with learning the technical skills of your trade, then understanding the people element. But I know you as such an entrepreneur, and you're kind of an outlier to a lot of the engineers that I've worked with in the past, where a lot of engineers are building a business to sell, but you by nature have a very strong entrepreneurial part of you. So did that sort of kick in, that entrepreneurial part of you did that kick in after you sort of got, I'm enjoying the people side of things?
Yeah, it had been lying in wait. I actually was reflecting on this a while though and realized that it actually came to light back in my university days. I went and did an exchange program in Canada for 12 months, when about midway through my degree. And it blew me away how different and yet similar Australians and Canadians were. But the major point of difference that I found in the Canadian institutions, the University of Waterloo is where I went over there near Toronto, was twofold. One was the students were so much more entrepreneurial than we are in Australia. Like, I just thought I went to uni, got a job. That was the deal. My parents were teachers, they got jobs, that's what you do. My cohort in Canada were like, oh, you're good at geotech stuff, you're good at structural, oh, you're good at civil. We should start a business. We could start. And I was like, who starts businesses? Like, you just get a job. You don't start a business. But their mentality was, how do we work together and form a business? And also that working together piece was a similar thing, whereby I found the education in Australia was very one out. That was just, I'll do my bit and if I'm struggling, I'm struggling. But over there, if one of their cohort was struggling, they're like, oh, Perry's not doing so well with the physics, we should help him with his physics, and they'd bring him up, and then you'd all do better. And it was a very collaborative way of doing university, which I think flowed through in their general business angle as well. So for me, that was a real light bulb moment back then. And I think I say it laid in wait because I then had spent 15 years with government. So it wasn't like I suddenly went out and went, let's start a business. I was still very conservative, and I still wanted to practice and learn my trade effectively for a good long period of time. But underneath it all, I was trying lots of things on the side. I was flipping houses and learning stock market trades and doing some multi-level marketing and selling business. And I was doing a lot of stuff, which is developing skills in addition to my 9 to 5. And I guess that over that period of time, then all those other little bits and pieces on the side added up to something which then led to at the right point, at the right time, go, now's my time to have a crack at actually building a business and actually using some of those entrepreneurial skills in a different way.
Well, why do you think that there was a big difference between Canada and Australia in the sense that Canada were producing more entrepreneurial thinkers?
I think it's that North American angle of, we have the tall poppy thing here, whereas over there it's like, oh, that's fantastic, you've done such a great job, and they build you up for the successes. And I think that Canada can run off the coattails of the US in that way, that the best things about the US is held up without all the other stuff.
Exactly.
Because they're so lovely. Like, it's just such a lovely, they're such a lovely people, and they'll just do anything for you. And it was just a great space to be. And so it just seemed to be that they would be more collaborative and build you up and want to support and want to see people succeed and revel in other successes because it was better for everybody.
Interesting enough, I had a trip there. I mean, I've traveled the world for years, and I didn't get to Canada until about 5 years ago. And I went over to see sons over there that were snowboarding, and I just found them the most incredible people. I had the same experience. I actually thought it was New Zealand on steroids. It's just like the big mountains, but same quiet. I could really see why Aussies and Kiwis and Canadians just get on so well. Okay, then this is going to lead me into something that I think is really important, because here you were sort of trained in what you and I know as technician or operator. And, you just talked about, which I want to dig into a little bit more, making this leap to being an entrepreneur. And, I use a framework all the time, and the framework looks like this. And this, by the way, this framework that I'm about to share changed my life. Really helped me to understand what I hadn't been taught growing up, which I'll talk to in a second. And once I started to grab this thinking, things just changed completely for me in the way that I operated in businesses. And that is simply this: control resources, don't be a resource. And that was the first thing my mentors taught me. And I can take that a little bit further, because we start talking about resources. And resources are capital, obviously, IP, people, strategy. So when we're the controller of those things, we are like the conductor of an orchestra, and we can start to build businesses separate from us when we do that. And I think it's interesting because we are all trained to be resources. So if we look at schooling systems, we're all trained to, go and learn this skill. And if you start to look deeper than that, right, there's an underlying assumption with that, which is if you go and get these skills, and I'm not off the education system, by the way, it's not what I'm knocking, but it just breeds something. What it breeds is that we come out of that and we're trained to trade the skills that we have learned for an hourly rate to someone else. And that is, so we're trained to be a resource. And it's just interesting, I've just finished off with this because my mentors were super wealthy. They were generationally wealthy, from generationally wealthy families. And I just observed straight away when they were sort of teaching me that principle that had been passed down their family line to control resources, or had been passed through my family line, and not only my family line in the working to middle class environment I grew up in, but even the professional classes were trained to go and be a resource. Like a doctor is just a higher end of this being a resource and trading that for time and money. So anything you want to say to that before I dig into your transition, which you've sort of talked about?
Yeah, well, it's very much my experience as well. I mean, as the son of a couple of educators, and my brother was a journalist, and that's, it was, you go to school, you get good grades, you go to uni, you try to succeed, you get a good job. Part of my decision around engineering was, how do I get paid to go to uni? I applied for every cadetship under the sun, wrote letters to every HR department. But I was, I guess, a little bit of a black sheep in that respect. I didn't just see going to uni as going to uni. I thought, well, if I can get paid to go to uni, why wouldn't I try that? So I guess there was something in there already around that space, but it was still very much though trading personal time for dollars. And then the other reading and stuff that I guess I was doing on the side was around, okay, well, how do you make a bit of excess, and how do you invest that extra? So it was, if you're going to be stuck on hourly rate stuff, at least get a decent hourly rate. And then with the extra hourly rate, what do you do with it to then maybe get to a different point? And so all that financial education, which you're not taught at school, is all the financial education that you have to seek out privately beyond school. And if you don't have generational wealth and people that talk about it at the dinner table, which I didn't, then you have to go and seek it from others. Otherwise, you're just naive to it. Through no one's fault, other than it's just knowledge transfer. And if you haven't got the knowledge, you can't transfer it. I found it interesting, hence was happy to go and learn and fail and try and fail and piece together bits and bobs, but eventually get enough information the hard way and through dialogue and through, some of it a bit questionable at times when you meet people that maybe purport to be something and turn out to be something else, but you learn through that as well. And at some point in time, you look back and take all those bits and go, like I talk about, sales and engineering. Like, as a salesman, I'm a pretty poor salesman. But in engineering space, I'm not too shabby, because it's a different space. Like I wouldn't go up against a real estate sales agent. I wouldn't have a hope. But in engineering, engineers aren't very, salesy. They're very ethical.
Yeah.
They very want to do a good job, and the community comes first. And you've got to do the right thing. And so then when you're then putting that forward as to how we can offer a service, it never felt salesy to me in the same way that other sales I'd done in the past felt salesy, where I was trying to convince someone to get something they didn't really need. In this case, I could just see a massive void of untapped work that people needed help to get done, and we could help them get it done in a way which was more professional, more efficient, servicing a need they clearly had. And so to me, that never felt salesy, because it was really just, and we could do with more and more if we had it, but we just didn't have it was limited by other factors, not by anyone thinking, I don't want to call that person, they're going to think I'm salesy. It's like they were like, oh, can you help us with this? Yes, we can. Terrific.
Yeah, so super purpose driven. So then what happened? You earlier on you talked about going to school, the technical element, and then you started to talk about when you realized how much for people think it was, and right now you started to talk about like spotting opportunities.
Yep.
When did you really start to make that leap into that entrepreneurial space in engineering, where you went, okay, I'm going to build this? And just if you could just quickly talk to that transition.
Sure. I think it was one of those things of like moving towards or moving away from. For me, I was as much moving away from a life in a bureaucracy, which was somewhat soul destroying, to not wanting to cast aside all the skills I've developed over 15 or so years in government, and working at something I really did quite enjoy most of the time, but just felt very hamstrung by way of some of the red tape and bureaucracy that many people would have experienced directly or indirectly through their professional careers. And so the reinvention of that for me was being one step removed. Even though we consult heavily to government, being outside of government is very refreshing. Being able to actually say what you think and say, look, you can take it or leave it, but this is my opinion of where we're at, and this is what I suggest as a recommendation way forward. And as a consultant or a contractor, there's something about your opinion being valued more highly than sometimes when you're on staff, even though it's the same voice and the same opinion. So I felt that really was a chance to step beyond the employee hat, move into initially a sole trader. I just hung out my shingle and did my own thing for 5 or so years. Until then, I could properly then see the opposite. So that for me was just a change in hourly rate. That was just selling myself at a higher rate to do much the same stuff. With some confidence that I was half decent at what I did, and that would be a market for it. But at some point,
and in that way, by the way, you're still a resource in the business at that point, aren't you? Like you're still
absolutely. I was the business. It was my hourly rate generating, and it took, even though I'd read like E-Myth by Gerber was one of those ones that I remember reading, saying around, how do you exactly that? You don't want to be a hairdresser. To run a hairdressing business, don't be a hairdresser, because you'll always fall back to being on the tools. And so I was the project manager in a civil engineering infrastructure business that could always fall back to being the problem solver, the project manager on the tools. And so the leap for me was getting after those initial 5 years. The second 5 years of actually building the business to sell was all about then, how do I get off the tools? And will this even work if I'm not the one earning? That leap of faith, that shift of, but if I'm not the one bringing in a couple $100 an hour, well, what happens then? Where does that money go? Like, how will this really even work? And so there's a number of steps in the confidence piece there around knowing that, no, it actually works better. So each time there was this shift in, well, if I dial back to half load, what does that do? If I actually stop and just work on the business, what does that do? And lo and behold, it accelerated. It didn't go backwards. I didn't suffer from that. I actually went forward faster. So, but
of course, and why
shift.
does it go? Yeah, why does it go forward faster? Like, we're dealing with some key principles here, and that fear that you've just communicated about. A lot of people listening and watching this will have that fear, because I think it's really important to say, and just go back and see if this was true for you, that when you are doing the work, you feel in control. You actually feel in control of your income. To suddenly look at the expense of bringing others on.
Yep.
is scary enough in itself, and you're going to grow a business. So you're doing other things and looking at, one of the things I would observe is that you can be focused on growing a business to sell, or you can be focused on getting income in now. And those two things don't necessarily correlate. You do one or the other. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
I do. Yep.
Yeah.
And there's lots of, and it depends on where you're up to as well. There's absolutely nothing wrong in my mind of doing that for a good length of time. And many people are very successful in their businesses by still being, they really love, like I met a lot of technical people that just love what they do. They could be just running the business, but they still choose to be doing X amount of billable hours a week or a month. And I think as long as it's a conscious choice, absolutely, but it's the ones I feel sorry for are the ones that are like, I just can't take a break. I can't get a breather. I can't turn off because I just haven't got it set up in that way that I can't step away for 5 seconds. And that was where I got to, saying I went on a particular holiday for it was 5 days, and it was miserable because I spent the entire time troubleshooting stuff back at the office, and it wasn't the intention, and it was far worse than being at work. And I thought, okay, something's got to change, because for me, I wasn't getting enough joy out of being on the tools as it was to warrant not having any other balance in my life unless I was actually turning up.
Yeah, absolutely get that. So then what did you face? Like what moving from what we call that technician or operator stage to conductor stage? And I don't think I've talked to you about that, because we work differently compared to when I'm working with a lot of my other clients. That conductor stage, for those that are watching, is that's working on your business, and that's when you're actually starting to allocate resources. So for Dion, that would have meant his first few key hires, putting his key hires in place, how he adjusted, once he's freeing himself up from the tools, what does he do now to ensure there's more income coming? Yeah, so just speak to that. Like, what was that like?
Yeah.
And what challenges did you have with that?
I used to watch. I did watch the dollars very, very carefully. We like many small business owners, you run stuff on the smell of an oily rag, and you do need to watch very carefully how everything runs through the books. And for me, a large part of that was my own income earning potential. And it took as I mentioned earlier, a little while to be able to say, well, if I don't earn that myself, how do I even recoup that? And is that valid? Do we even have a business if I can't do that? And so there was a particular, I think back to when I took my first full-time person on, and the responsibility of, all right, I've got a now responsibility for her mortgage. I think if I don't make a runner of this, I'm affecting that other person who's put their faith in me that this is a good idea and we're going to make this work. And for me, that taking on that first office lease and putting that first full-time person on was a massive mental shift. The next massive mental shift was when I actually properly got off the tools and replaced myself in a particular contract I was working on with a particularly skilled person that came in at just the right time to allow me to step away and not be turning up on that project, because I could see that I was getting too stretched. I wasn't able to juggle all the balls. We maybe had 15 staff by then. I was still working full time in a contract director, project director role, and just it was too much, you know, and I could hear myself getting narky. I could hear myself getting short with people, and it wasn't their fault. I was just stressed. So I needed to then replace, you know, some of that with a new person, and that was then the next phase of growth. Then was when I could actually focus on the business proper, and it happened to be just a pre-COVID, so it was really good timing because I was actually available to go run and shore up all the contracts, talk to all the clients, reassure them we'll do whatever it takes during this period as long as I can keep my staff employed. You know, I don't care wherever your gaps are, just work with us to work with you to help keep everyone employed. That was my main game. And if I'd still been managing projects, I wouldn't have had the scope to do that. But as it was, I could properly build the business, and we actually grew through all that phase. We're one of the very, very fortunate ones that, you know, weren't affected on the downside during that period, and I'm, you know, very grateful for that. And that then became, and then there's another period after that of putting in senior management team to again scale again and go the next step. But that particular one was one I look back on and think I'm so glad I made that decision to replace myself and properly then be able to work on the business.
Yeah, because what I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is in freeing your time up by bringing on those key hires.
Yep.
It's not like you're going to play golf, and I know you wouldn't anyway, but it's like that enabled you now to really go out there and secure more dollars. So basically by bringing those key hires on, you could actually concentrate now on something you couldn't do when you're working in the business, which is actually securing more income. And yeah, so that is, and just for those that are listening, you know, I often go into businesses and I would observe, Dion, you know, where there's cash flow issues, that there's not enough marketing and sales happening. And what you see is you watch what everyone's doing. Everyone's working in the business, working on jobs, projects, developing their systems and all those things. And there's no one concentrating on marketing and sales. And I think it's really important here to share that you have to free up time or team time so that we guarantee income is coming in, and you can only do that through marketing and sales. So that was your sort of first approach.
That's right.
Okay,
and
great.
So that time I pretty much moved then into tendering, bidding, client management, and all those focused on those conversations around just being available for clients, which would then lead to a conversation around what else they needed and where the next opportunity was coming from.
So then did that enable you to be more relational? So by not working in the tools, not being so technical, you were more relational. Is that another thing that you're sort of sharing here? Is that why?
Yes, but consciously, actively having to do it though. But by being on the tools, you find yourself in situations where you're having the conversations anyway, because you happen to be at a client's office, you happen to be helping with something, you tend to have those conversations still occur. By then not being there for those periods of time, you have to then actively go and seek out those conversations and be more relational, because you weren't just turning up and having those sideline conversations over a cup of coffee. So I have to be more focused. But there's every reason to be when you've got a number of staff doing a number of roles. It's perfectly reasonable. You want to be having those conversations with your clients around, well, you know, how is Perry performing? You know, is there anything I can help you with? Is there something else you need to add on to that? Or, you know, what's the next little bit look like? And it's not a conversation which is hard, because it's the client wants you to be involved as well, and they want that feedback. And if there isn't something quite right, you can nip it in the bud.
Well, what did you learn? Like, because, you know, when you were all these years working in your business and with your technical proficiency, what you were trained in, and all of a sudden you're bringing on key hires, and this is where it's going to get interesting for a moment, right? You're bringing those key hires on, and you start to shift yourself out of those old roles into this new role. One of which, of course, is ensuring that you're able to concentrate on sales and marketing and get quality contracts to pay everybody and make money for you and build a business to sell, which you did.
Yep.
But to move into that, what I would call the CEO role, right? CEO investor role in some way, where you're starting to take responsibility for well, you've always done that, but bigger business, you've got to, you know, how you fund that up and you grow it. What did you have to learn in that process, like the shift from being the technician operator to actually growing the business? Like, what kind of challenge did that represent to you, and what skills were you forced to learn?
The major one for me was around delegation, and you've probably be no one on the call that probably isn't already well aware of that. But it's one thing to know it, another thing to actually have to do it. And I was a very slow, as someone that was pretty capable in their own little mud puddle, I thought I could do it best, and I took a very long time to even. I was the sort of person that did my own accounts for a while, and did everything I could do myself. I was like, oh, I can do it better than an accountant. Why would I not? I don't need an accountant. Lawyers, I can read a contract. Why would I need a lawyer? I don't pay for that. So I was very much, I'll just do it myself. And it took me quite a while to get to the point of going, you know what? They can do it faster, better, cheaper, more effectively than I can, and I can do something else. So if I can find the right accountant and the right lawyer and the right coach, it's so much better off. But that was a slow convert to that. A bit like the delegation piece of learning that, and there's a couple of key ones I just remember where I see handed over a package of work and went, okay, I wonder how they're going to go with that. And then they came back done differently but better. And I went, oh, I didn't see that coming. That's pretty cool. So it wasn't how I expected it would be done, but they've actually improved on what I thought they would do. And so by giving people a bit more rope, the lesson for me was about how much rope can you give. And I was given a lot of rope, through my career. I didn't really appreciate it until later looking back going, gee, they gave me more than enough rope to hang myself a few times over. And me getting better at giving people rope and then being pleasantly surprised when they do a better job or a different job than you'd envisaged, and how few times you have to pick up the pieces. Like yes, there's things that stuff up, and you'd be naive to suggest that things don't always go well, but that thing around imagined issues versus actual ones, where it's just like, none of that eventuated. It was fine, but the occasional times that things do go wrong, well, that's the bit where you turn your attention to focus to fix it. But in the meantime, you're so much better off by them being engaged, stepping up, doing stuff, being properly satisfied in their roles. It's a different space to be in. So.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm getting from you too is how trust was gained. Meaning you gain trust of other people doing things by giving them enough rope and seeing how they performed, which I think is really important. I want to come back to. Just before we get into that, that pattern you talked about before, I've actually just have been doing some writing on that pattern for an email sequence that I have to create, and it's called the I can pattern. And the I can pattern for people that are with high levels and wide-ranging competencies, which Dion you have, so do I. The challenge and issue is you go, wow, I can do that. Well, I can do that. We'll build the website. We'll do. It's like what you just said.
The website. Oh God.
For those that are watching and listening to this, you have to be very aware of the I can pattern. And I think there's a really important thing to share here. You may be able to, but you're not building out a business system separately from you if the moment you're going to I can thinking. And there's another key principle here, and Dion's kind of expressing that. So if he's doing everything, that's 10, 11, 12 hours of his day taken up, where if other people are doing things for him that he can do, but they're doing things for him, it frees up his time to work on what we call his highest dollar productive activities. And this is something that's not communicated about much. And I think also there's another element to this, because even in the way that you're communicating now, if you go back a couple of years, you're still thinking of hourly rate from a certain perspective, right? And I just want to, this is not so much for you. I want anyone that's watching this, I think this is just such a key concept. If you actually look at, you've built and sold that business quite quickly. First of all, I'll park that. That was quite, you've done that fast. But one of the things, if you look at your hourly rate, if you take 2 years of working and then you take what you got paid for your business, which we're not disclosing, but what you got paid for your business, right? Now, that should give you another view of your hourly rate, because
effective hourly rate is one of those concepts that I think is lost on even on wage earners, in terms of, and I was talking to my daughter the other day. She had two job opportunities. One was in the town she lives in, one was in the neighbouring town. Very similar dollar rate, but she's got the commute. I said, well, work out your effective hourly rate. She said, what's an effective hourly rate? And I said, well, one of them's got an extra 10 hours a week in it because you've got to travel. So your effective hourly rate drops by the fact you're not doing 40 hours, you're doing 50 hours. Now back divide it by that and work out which one's better. The other one in the neighbouring town needs to be paid, 20% better to make it worth your while. Unless it's just unless the job, all other things being equal, come back to that. And I know a lot of executives that do, a lot of extra hours. is that really what's your effective hourly rate? You might find that it's not anywhere near as good as your ego thinks it is, because you just got this big number that you're just busting your ass.
Correct. I'm aware of time, so we'll start to head towards a close. If you've got another 5 or 6 minutes, is that okay?
I'm good. Yeah, no worries.
Okay, we may even go to 10. Okay, so I just want to stay with this because this is a little challenge for you right now. Yep. You've sold the business, and we're going to stay with this effective hourly rate for a second. If you look, I'm not going to ask you to quantify it in public. You don't need to. But if you actually look at the hours that you put into versus the return that you got, that should by rights, and I know what you're doing now and what you're about to do and what you're going to continue to do as an entrepreneur, but has that shifted your viewpoint? Because, potentially each hour with you is worth multiple thousands of dollars, right? Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Now, has that landed for you now in the sense of how you use your time?
Particularly, I'm very protective of my calendar, and I'm very protective of meeting times and making sure that we're not just sitting in meetings for an hour because it's easy for Outlook to book an hour calendar or a half-hour calendar or whatever it might be. It's like, what do you need to get done? Pick up the phone, ring the person, have the conversation, next. So there's an effectiveness piece in there that I try to impart on all my staff and team members around that, and looking very hard at everyone in our team, that concept that you've taught me well around highest and best use for me and everybody else. And it's one of those things that I often say to my staff around, if you look at a task and you make a noise, if you emit a noise like, I've got to do such and such, fairly good, that's a pretty good indicator that you probably shouldn't be doing that, or there's someone else better placed to do that than you. Because if you're really at that point of just not being in the headspace of doing that task, there's probably someone else that would be quite extended by, or like the challenge of, or be ready to do the next thing in that space. And you're both better off by finding that person to do it for you and teaching them to do it and do it well. And then you don't have to do it. They're doing it and they're happy because they're growing in their roles. They're getting extra skills and abilities, and you're not the one going, I don't want to do whatever that thing was that made you make that noise.
Yeah, no. Dion, would you come back if I asked you to come back and do another interview?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, right. One of the
always good riffing with you, Barry.
Yeah, good, because I might even actually ask you to. I'll do this publicly. I might even ask you. I have been thinking about this, a sneaky thing for you to co-host some of these interviews with me, and we can interview some people together. Anyway, I do like working with you. So yeah, we'll park that, but that's probably where I'm going to hunt you down at some stage and ask you that.
Cool.
The reason that I want to extend the conversation and probably get you back is, look, I've told you, and I know you're a humble guy, so you always sort of push back, but I always say, what's your wife say? You're very good with people, and I think part of the success that you've had and the success that you're going to continue to have is your knowledge and understanding of people and how you build a team. And so I think that that probably deserves a whole hour conversation at some point that we can put people in front of. I'm just going to come back for the audience for a second, because what did you call it with the time? How did you call it? When you talk about your daughter and another 10 hours a week traveling.
Just the effective hourly rate. Effective hourly
rate.
Not your hourly. The hourly rate's what you get paid, but what's your effective rate? So if you're staying up every night, so in a more corporate sense, if you're one of those busy executives that is then also doing get the kids to bed, do dinner, everything else, and then do another 3 or 4 hours at night time, add those 3 or 4 hours a day for 3 or 4 or 5 nights a week onto your normal 30 or 40 or 50 or whatever it might be, and then back calculate that and work out what you're really getting paid. Again, is that your best? Is that really how you want to spend your days? And,
great. So this is for those that are watching. I just really want to reiterate this, because I'm working with people all the time that bring unconscious tendencies to what they do, and there is this unconscious tendency because of what we talked about before. You're trained in resource thinking. You go to school, you learn, I've got to get the skills that I trade every hour to get paid. Now when my clients come and work with me, Dion, I'm the one that suffer that conditioning because I'm trying to get them to control resources. And then the next thing in regards to this, because of the way they've been trained to think, they see each hour in a way that I tend to sort of push back against, because I'm looking at, if you're going to go and build this business to sell, which means we want to improve the value, and we'll probably touch off on this. I'll probably speed things up and let you have free rant. I'm going to ask you a question in a second, give you free rant, and we'll close it up and get back together at a later stage. But if you're building a business to sell, you've got to take your hourly rate based on what you're going to get for the sale of that business, not just the income that you're getting, but what you sell the business for. So if you're building a business that you can sell for $4 million, $40 million, or $50 million, that must be taken into account around your hourly rate. And so, you know, once you've sold a business for a lot of money, all of a sudden you go, wow, each hour that I work contributes to that huge sale. And therefore, from here on in, I must think like that. Each hour is going to build something else that I am going to sell. And so that creates a ruthlessness compared to the person who's looking at their business going, oh, I still trade time for money, or I've got this small team and I've just got to get the income in. I think that's a very different viewpoint to my hours must be spent increasing the value of the business. Would you agree with that, by the way?
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So I am, you know, the truth is I could spend 2 hours with you now, Dylan. Like, I'm finding this fascinating and interesting, and I just love being in the interviewer's seat and getting to listen, right? Thank you. So we will just touch off on team. How instrumental has team been to not only your success for the sale of the business, but how important is team for you overall? And what's your viewpoints about team? What insights and tips can you give to people about team?
Well, yeah, very. I mean, in terms of what buyers are looking for in businesses, there's a number of key things, but one of them is that moving past that element of it's all about me. It can't be all about me. If it's all about me, there's really nothing to. There's no maximising of value in that business, because what happens to me tomorrow if something goes wrong, or we just fall out of love and something else happens. But if we have a strong management team in place and a strong team underneath the management team as well, and there's depth of resource there and redundancy and capabilities sharing and that sort of thing, it's like having a really good client mix. You know, there's a layering effect of a properly good team with a good puppeteer can really hum along nicely. Having a really good mix of clients is another key factor in terms of what makes a business attractive to a buyer as well, because it's not like, well, what happens tomorrow if you fall out of love with one client, or their client falls out of love with you, or a sector changes, or a political decision is handed down beyond everyone's control, or
good
shop
point.
You just can't trade anymore. So there's lots of factors that stack up to be, and so what can you control? So there's things you can't control, and there's 0 point agonizing over that. But of the things you can control, then how quickly do you put in place those measures to make that work to your advantage? And so hence building team, and moving into an environment where you've got support around you and redundancy. That's a key part of it.
And what did you said a good puppeteer? What makes a good puppeteer? I don't know, Rob, but I like that.
Yeah, I feel that that's now where knowing when to insert yourself and when to step away, when to give people rope. I have a lot more sideline conversations now than I ever did. I don't even turning up to group meetings or section meetings for parts of the business unit. I feel like it's about thinking about it. If a tree falls in the forest, a bit like that. If I'm not there, what really happens, or what did I really do? But I need to give people the scope to do their thing, and sometimes just being in a room changes the dynamic. So there might be a pre-conversation or a post-conversation that might be more healthy than me sitting in a meeting run by one of a senior leadership team, because everyone's just a bit different when you're there. Whereas if you brief people appropriately and they've asked you the questions they want to get sorted, and then they told you the direction they want to go down something, and you've had the chance to feed in and maybe hypothesize a few approaches or plant a few seeds and say, look, take it or leave it. If it crops up, maybe try this, maybe try that, but it's yours. Then the satisfaction the individual in the team gets also from having that ownership and actually being part of driving it and not being micromanaged is a massive difference to their personal job satisfaction and also their career progression. And everyone's just happier for it. And in time-wise, again, in terms of being protective of a calendar, well, I don't want to sit in a meeting for an hour with my team around a subset when I know that it's under control. Let them do their job. They're very good at their jobs. We hire good people on the basis that they're very technically good. So we just don't want to puppeteer, enough of the whole, maybe deprioritize that, maybe reprioritize that. But on balance, yeah, doing a great job. Keep doing what you're doing, but just look over here for a bit.
What I love about what you're sharing, Dion, and obviously I work with you, so I understand some of your core skill sets. It's actually very rare. I'll just share a couple of patterns that I see all the time. So the control freak, that big swinging dick thing we talked about before, the alpha person, whether that's male or female, who must be the center of attention, they find it very hard to do what you've just shared, okay? Or if someone on the unconscious level has a high need to be needed, and again, they won't do what you're doing, because you're really talking about being able to set, you're empowering people, setting people up to do their job properly, letting them know where they're not, but nurturing the team to take responsibility is a sense I get when you communicate. And I think, and I just want to probably sort of finish up on this, knowing I'm going to get you back. There's just so much gold I can dig into here. You have always displayed a fair bit of what I call people wisdom. And people wisdom for me, I'll speak it and you tell me whether it's true or not. Okay. You sort of work to understand people. So you're quite an amazing rapport builder and rare in the engineering industry, in the sense of you really get to know people and you size them up well. You work to understand them without inserting yourself and having to be that. So I've got the sense, it's like all your family members sort of inside and out, their little intricacies, where they're weak, where they're strong. And I think, that word you used before, like the puppeteer, I love that word, because you're not like the malicious puppeteer. You're just like there guiding. But how much of that people wisdom do you think comes into play? Is the way that I've communicated fair about how you are?
I think the way I often verbalize it is around best fit and trying to, we have successes and failures based on best fit. And one of my earliest lessons and what I do when I'm mentoring some of the university students I work with is just reiterating how broad the industry is and how there's a role for everyone. But if you're in the wrong role, you'll be pretty miserable, and you might be able to do it. And I've been in those roles in the past. I've done stuff I just didn't enjoy. I was okay at it, but I just didn't enjoy it. And it was a pretty miserable existence. But when you're in the right fit of a role, whatever that might be for you, and it's different for everybody, it just makes much more sense. And I think getting to know your people then, in terms of, well, we've got a whole, and that's where the scale became important. When we had a very small business of very few opportunities, you couldn't provide best fit for our staff. Now that we've got a slightly bigger business and slightly more opportunity, you can then go, right, well, you're the best person for this and you'll be happy doing that. And you're the best person for this. And actually for that client, I might swap you out and put this person in because you'll get on better there and they'll be happier with it. And that's not quite working. So let's move that one out and put that one in. And then that's really humming now. That's great. You two are getting along great. And no difference in technical skills, but about the people match. And the people match as a client, contractor mix is just as important as our team as well. And that's where my efforts often go, is all that sort of chess playing, I guess. Because if you get it right, it makes such a difference. And if you get it wrong, it's pretty miserable to then have to pick up the pieces of that. And so it's worth the investment in those things.
Great. Certainly some great truth bombs, knowledge bombs laid down there, Dion. Thank you so much for that. Anything you'd like to share? If there was a couple of key principles that you'd share with people that are kind of starting caught in their business, what would they be? And we'll close off with that. I'm going to bring them back, people.
Cool, Perry. Yeah, look, I'd love to come back. It's always good fun chatting. The couple of key ones, I guess, was just the issue of as technicians, most of us do like what we do, and it's just being more conscious of the decision around the time to work on your business, maybe it's not like me. Maybe it wasn't 100% on or off. It mightn't have been the Labrador thing where you're flat out or, going a million miles an hour or resting or sleeping. I was happy to do I'm off the tools, 100%, doing the next bit. I also think that there's a really good benefit in deciding consciously that I'm going to go half time. I'm going to do half the time on the business non-billable, half the time billable, because I just enjoy it and I think I add good value. And if that's a conscious decision, fine. But don't just do it because you don't realize what you're doing. I went back through my calendar for like 3 months and sort of looked at a snapshot of where I spent my time to sort of go, well, okay, how do I claw back the most time? This is after one of our conversations. And I looked at a key thing and went, if I can just change that element of the business where someone else does that, I'm going to have literally 25 hours a week free, or even 20. That was massive, to just look at where do you spend your time and is there another solution there? So, and if that means you've got to hire someone in, we hire someone in. If it's part-time or a part-time, might be a business development person, or it might be a part-time writer, or it might be another senior engineer or a senior technician, whatever that is. But who else can do this job, and what's that going to cost me, and what else can I do with my time whilst they're now doing that big chunk of stuff that was in my calendar across those days? That single activity of just looking at a good snapshot of time and going, how can I claw back time? I think that was remarkably valuable in terms of reassuring around, valuing your highest and best use. That's probably enough for now. But that's just one of those ones that I just really think between the best fit, doing stuff, making those things work in the business, and being conscious of how you spend your time and looking for other and properly, not just going, oh, well, there's no other solution. There's always another solution. There's always another deal. There's always another solution. There's always something else. I just don't fall for that. Carve out some time just for thinking, however that might be for you, because that's when you need that space. Don't just do something. Just sit there for a bit. Just think about stuff, strategize, spend some time sitting in the sun, looking at stuff, just thinking about it. I think they'll come. You'll get ideas and you'll be so much better for it.
It's actually amazing. I really thank you for that last little bit. It's something that I'm always teaching people to do. And it's really hard because most technicians are doers. I have 2 hours off and I'll just read and write. And it's always when I get strategic breakthroughs. And once we're working on businesses, you've got to remember our success comes from our thinking abilities, not from our doing abilities. I think that's really important shift to make and understand. Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Dion. I hope everyone got a lot from that. Send me through any messages, and I'm going to get them back, and we'll continue. I want to dig into Dion and team. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent.
Catch you.
Cheers.
See ya.